bookworms want to read faster, not only for its own sake, but so we can consume more books. With so many options out there, from ACOTAR to The Wheel of Time, it can be easy to get FOMO, even if you only read one genre like fantasy. That's why in today's video, I'll list 6 ways you can read faster. Your reasons for wanting to read more can be varied. Maybe you want to read all those great books you keep hearing about. Or you want to read more because you know it's good for you, or you're challenging yourself to read a set amount of books in 1 year, such as 50, 100, or 200. Whatever your reasons, all are valid. There are no right or wrong reasons to read as long as you're doing it. However, how should you go about increasing your reading speed? While not all of these methods will work for everyone, here are 6 tricks which could make you read faster or make the process of reading easier. The first method is to read multiple books at once, though it's one I've rarely used. Jumping between series feels strange to me, and I have no reason to do so if I'm loving a book. When I'm immersed in a Sarah J. Maas binge, the last thing I want to do is switch to another story. That said, I can't say I've never used this method, though I usually need a specific set of circumstances. First of all, if you are going to read 2 books at the same time, have a reason why. If one of the books you're tackling is dense or lengthy, it could help to intersperse lighter reads throughout. For example, if you're reading The Wheel of Time, having some fluffy romances or fast-paced YA books thrown in could prevent you from getting overwhelmed. Sometimes we need a break from something, and at 14 books with thousands of characters, the Wheel of Time books are noted to be intense. A Song of Ice and Fire and The Cosmere are likewise epic in nature, and so giving your brain a rest with something like The Cruel Prince or Icebreakers is fair. Reading 2 series at once can also be helpful if they're significantly different from each other. To use my own life as an example, I read Anne Rice's Mayfair Witches trilogy at the same time as Percy Jackson. Aside from both series featuring magic, the stories couldn't be more different from each other. The first Mayfair book is 900 pages plus, and it's a blend of family drama and gothic horror, very much intended for adults. While Percy Jackson is a casual, middle-grade series centered on Greek mythology. It was the differences between the series that allowed me to burn through both, as I could read according to mood. If you find yourself disinclined to read, ask yourself this: do you not want to read at all, or are you not in the mood to read what you currently have on the go? If it's the latter, pick up what you are in the mood for. If you read multiple genres, reading several books at once is even more likely, as you might be in the mood for epic fantasy one day and fluffy romance the next. If you're reading an especially long fantasy series, it makes sense to break it up with standalones, whether of the same genre or not, if just to prevent yourself from getting too much of the same. Finally, if you're someone who reads nonfiction, then I'd encourage reading both. For me, consuming nonfiction feels completely different from reading fiction. Nonfiction actually makes me sleepy, while fiction stimulates me. So for my brain, reading either one is another experience altogether. The second trick is to read within your preferences. This might seem obvious, but if you're into a broader genre like fantasy or romance, it can be easy to end up with a book that's not for you. Every genre comes with subgenres, and you should know which ones you prefer. This isn't to say you should limit yourself. If you've never tried a given subgenre and you'd like to experiment, go for it. Still, if your goal is simply to read and read quickly, aiming for stories you know you'll love is helpful. By finding what subgenres you prefer, you can also find more books which include your favorite tropes, elements or character types. For example, if you're someone who likes grand scale world building, then you know to turn to epic fantasy. If you're someone who needs a dash of romance with your dragons or a devilishly handsome bad boy, then young adult or new adult should be where you look first. For my part, I'm fairly open-minded when it comes to my preferences, though I mainly stick to fantasy. My favorite subgenres are young adult fantasy, new adult fantasy, paranormal romance, urban fantasy, and epic fantasy, with the occasional middle grade. What I feel like reading will also shift based on my mood. But one of the reasons I adore Sarah J. Maas is because she combines many of my favorite subgenres, combining everything I love about epic fantasy with those elements I adore from young adult. She has love triangles, bad boys, and fated mates like any fun YA. However, she also has grand scale wars, politics, conniving monarchs, and rich worlds to satisfy the side of me which loves Tolkien or Sanderson. When a book hasn't immediately grabbed me, it's usually because it doesn't fit within my preferences. I had to take a break from reading Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell because, while I liked it, it was missing a lot of my preferences, such as a deeper exploration of the characters' inner psyches, higher stakes, and heart-pounding romance. There's nothing wrong with the book, but it put me in a reading slump because it didn't contain many of the elements I personally enjoy in a story. However you go about it, identify your preferences and then search within them. If you know you love epic fantasy, but tend to get bored with magical realism, then stick with what you know. Or use the first method on this list and read a book you're less keen about alongside one you are. The third method many readers swear by is using a Kindle. Personally, I'm someone who needs to read a physical copy if it's fiction, but I have no problem reading ebooks if they're nonfiction. Among the reading community, there seems to be a phenomenon where Kindle causes you to read much faster, and it's not hard to see why. To begin, all books look the same with Kindle. In addition to stories being presented with a large font that's easy on the eyes, a reader can't see how much they've actually read or have to read. There's a percentage which tells you how far into a book you are, but you can't physically see how many pages you have to read, or how fat the book is. Many readers avoid books like Priory of the Orange Tree because they can see how long they are. Some avoid jumping into the Stormlight Archive or Wheel of Time because of the sheer weight of the volumes. But Kindle hides these factors from you, effectively allowing you to trick your brain. Going by percentages instead, it's easier to plow through longer books, because as long as you can see you're making progress, you don't have that overwhelm factor. It's easier to push through another 10% than it is to push through another 200 pages. Second, Kindles are easier to carry around, which means you're more likely to read them habitually, on the bus, on your breaks, or between tasks. You can carry them on your commute and have them with you at all times. Physical books are sometimes too heavy to boot around, especially if you're reading an epic or a hardcover. But with Kindle, you can travel anywhere with a whole library in your pocket. If you finish a book while you're out, you can jump to the next one. Reaching for the Kindle and popping through a few pages simply becomes a habit. And before you know it, you've read 10 books without even trying. Of course, I want to offer a caveat. While you might read more with a Kindle, you won't necessarily absorb as much. Studies have proven that people who read physical copies retain more information. The very act of holding the book and being able to see your place in it boosts your memory. And if you want to enjoy a book deeply and take in every detail, I'd still advocate for reading the physical copy, especially if it's a story or an author you love. As a quick aside, be sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this video. The fourth method is to listen to audiobooks. It's not something I do, but it works for others, and I saw one girl on TikTok who managed to read 30 books in a month by not only reading physical copies and ebooks, but by throwing in audiobooks. To return to my first method, in which you read multiple books at once, many read in threes. They read one physical book, one ebook, and listen to one audiobook, cycling between them. Whether you consider listening to an audiobook as reading or not is up to you. You're consuming books, but I wouldn't say I'd read a nonfiction book if I'd listened to a podcast or a YouTube video. That said, this is only how I feel. While listening to an audiobook wouldn't feel like reading to me, I can't tell you if it's valid for you. The reality is, many people don't have time to sit down and read a book, and so audiobooks open literature to more people. Furthermore, if you're someone who is blind, audiobooks can allow you to enjoy amazing stories, even if you can't read Braille. Something it should be noted that only a small percentage of the blind can actually do. If you're someone who does have the time to sit down with a book, either physically or on your Kindle, audiobooks can act as a supplement when you're driving to work, doing the dishes, or working with your headphones on. An audiobook can both pass the time and give you the space to enjoy a book you wouldn't have gotten to otherwise. Plus, if you're going by the 3x3 method, you can rack up words quickly, as well as expose yourself to a variety of authors, worlds, and stories. The fifth trick is to prioritize reading. Again, this sounds obvious, but are you lacking the time to read? Or are you relegating time you could be reading to other hobbies? I've always read quickly, but it's not until the past couple years that I've reached a level where I could read 100 books in a year. Many of us have more free time than we know, but we spend it binging Netflix, playing video games, or scrolling on social media. Now, I'm not saying you have to give those hobbies up. I still binge TV shows on occasion and play video games, but by moderating these activities, I can meet my reading goals. What you have to do is be intentional with your time. For example, you might read in the afternoon and watch TV at night, or vice versa. You might read through the week and save TV for the weekends. Or you might read 2 books on the weekend and unwind with TV when you eat. The fact is, you have to make reading a priority. On the most extreme end, there are those who do nothing but read. They have no other hobbies and might even review books for a living. And so they can read 200 books in a year or 30 books in a month without batting a lash. When it comes to me, I'll often read between 9 and 13 books a month, which allowed me to read 100 books last year. I still watched TV, played video games, wrote books, posted videos, and ran my pet sitting business. But I made the time. In theory, I could probably read more. If I gave up video games and refused to scroll through social media at all, I could rack up the reads. But that hasn't seemed necessary to me, and I still want to be well-rounded hobby-wise. How much time you allocate to reading is a personal choice, and there's no right or wrong answer. But if you want to read more, definitely consider cutting back on other areas. Finally, your safest bet is to go with a favorite author. Occasionally, you'll read a book by a preferred writer that doesn't grab you, but most of the time, writers stick to similar ideas, characters, and styles. While there are differences between Sarah J. Maas's ACOTAR and Throne of Glass series, they still include many of the same elements, including those I love. To that end, I fully expect to burn through Maas's Crescent City books, because they will be new but familiar. There will still be fae, fantasy world building, gorgeous men, and romance, to say nothing of the prose style or approach to story that's already reeled me in. Many of the top authors have large bodies of work, with those like Colleen Hoover, Stephen King, and Brandon Sanderson being especially prolific. Some of the top writers even have forgotten backlogs, which, while well written, include books that are older and otherwise didn't have the benefit of BookTok to boost them. Everyone knows Holly Black's Cruel Prince, but if you were someone who loved the trilogy and wants something similar, Holly Black has previously penned several series, including one she co-wrote with Cassandra Clare, yet another author who has an extensive series to lose yourself in. If you're into fantasy, you have the added benefit of not only returning to the same author, but to the same characters or worlds. Some readers are intimidated by this, but I'm personally someone who loves a great series, or a great world, which includes multiple trilogies or sagas within a shared universe. For standalones, Colleen Hoover has an extensive library. Julia Quinn has plenty of romance novels beyond Bridgerton. Stephen King has dozens upon dozens of books, ranging from supernatural horror to thrillers. And authors like Rainbow Rowell and Rebecca Yarros have jumped between contemporary and fantasy. Of course, my expertise is fantasy, so if you want not only the same writer, but the same universe, or at least different universes which connect to each other, I have to recommend Brandon Sanderson, Sarah J. Maas, or Cassandra Clare. Each world offers something different. But all authors offer you more than a trilogy or two. Their worlds are extensive, at least 10 books plus, but are broken down into smaller stories, which still follow different characters and places, giving you the best of both worlds. Plus, all three writers are still writing, meaning that there's more to come, even if you've already devoured everything they've written. And this doesn't even cover the work these three have done outside their main worlds. Whatever your reasons for wanting to read faster, there are plenty of ways to do so. Whether it's reading other formats like ebooks or audiobooks, knowing your own tastes, making the time to read, or sticking with authors and worlds you know and love, it's not hard to increase your Goodreads count. That said, reading hundreds of books a year, especially in the interest of inflating a number, has its downsides, which I address in the video on the left. As always, thank you for watching and happy reading.